What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today. Today I'm excited to show up a Thavas Premium deck profile, and I got top 8 with the Springfest 2020-23 here for Rosemont specifically, and shout outs to Duke Cardfight and also John for being phenomenal teammates as well. I'm going to cover the mindset going into the metagame, some of the card choices, some key plays, and wrap it up with some suggestions and closing thoughts. So let's get right into it. I'm also a METAFY coach that has helped numerous players get their results and tops. I actually help with the standard, V Premium, and Premium formats, and I help you prepare for tournament preparation as well, so that way you get your results that you're looking for and helping out with your goal. I just want to help the community grow, and feel free to book a session with me. And also to help you out more, I also just came out with the book How to Win Cardfight Tournaments, Break Through Your Mental Barrier, and Topping Trading Card Game Tournaments. And so it's available for Kindle, paperback, and also the audiobook will be coming out soon. And it's the #1 new release as well. So I'm excited for you guys to see the content and value from it too and your results. So with the mindset I win an image, Thavas is a really good contender in this metagame. So the last time that I really played competitively with this deck specifically was for Worlds for January 2023. And the metagame had changed slightly, but not dramatically, because we had a ban list that hit Ingilsa for Steam Maidens, but they still have the Chrono Jet play where they can use Entrada to Soul Blast it out and still ride down. So ride down is still a thing. And of course there's Highlander and there's Nightmare Dolls, of course. And then the other thing that happened with this ban list, which nobody expected, was Katrina back to 4. So Neo Nectar all of a sudden is a contender. And there's 2 variants that I was looking out for, specifically Inez and also Musketeer, specifically Cecilia Reverse, which I've done a deck profile too. Those decks are a force to be reckoned with, especially if they do win the first stride and go off with Katrina. It's very strong for them too. So with that being in mind, and also because it be in teams, there's also a likelihood of certain decks to show up, such as Mega Colony. And Mega Colony has seen some tops and also seen plays as being like their 3rd player, but also with the rise of Musketeers or just Inez in general for Neo Nectar, it stops Katrina, right? And so more than likely I would face it, if not a couple times. So that was also another thing to consider. So with the combinations of all those metagame analysis, I felt Thavas was still in a good spot. And so that's why we have access to the write down. But not only that, we have access to a new promo code over here, Repress Strike Dragon. It's a restander. In fact, it gets stronger. The only thing that I didn't like about this card is that it requires a booster. But I'll dive into that and why I play a certain ratio of it too in the actual card choices. But with that being in mind, my goal was to stay at low damage, play the game that I had to go to write down, and know that there were certain decks that I had to play that game multiple times, such as like Steam Maidens, for example, or I should say Gears at this point, because they use Chrono Jet and Steam Maiden support. And then, of course, go into the stride game, finish off with Katrina, such as like Valeos, because Inez also can power up defensively with the G-Guard play, and also Musketeers can do the same thing with Saul by force activating a trigger potentially. So Valeos will bring it back down to 11k, which has came up before. And then also with Mega Colony, there is a play that it just plays around Mega Colony really well, but Thavas naturally can get around Gridoro's stun effects pretty easily too. So let's get right into it. Starting with the grade 3s and the grade 4s, we have Thavas over here. So you want to play maximum copies because 1, it's your right target. You needed to do the pseudo stride into Lambros or Magnolia and then right back down when appropriate. You also can rest a rigor to retire something, so that retire aspect can mean the difference of the battle of attrition when you're going against another write down deck such as Steam Gear Chronicle, for example, Highlander, Nightmare Dolls. And then even later on, or even during those turns, you can pump up your Narissas to become beaters. So she can easily become 23, 33k, and she's also a force to be reckoned with. So that's why even this card as a rear guard is valuable in that sense too. And you want to play max copy so you can see it consistently and be able to do even the Progenitor Stride, which will come up later in my deck profile. And as the 5th writable grade 3 with the Excel gift, it is Genovia still. As I mentioned with my Worlds profile, it's a win con if you're going against a write down deck. They go back to 2. They've already gone to 3, so that means grade 3 Heal Gardens don't work anymore. The only viable defenses they have is really Rollock, and Genovia's just, you know, with the 2nd Excel circle that you ride back up with, you have 9 attacks. It's really hard to survive that. And if you generate more Excel circles, if you're finding it out, for example, there was a very good Gear Chronicle player that I faced. His name's Tommy. We literally went up to grade 3, rolled back down to 2, 3 times each. So I had 3 Excel circles, and I was almost about to ride Genovia's, but I was close to deck out. And if I would have rode The XL2 was a mandatory draw, and then if I drove check, I would deck out. So that play that didn't come up, but it was just there just to have it. But the concept is there because you just never know. And so you want to make sure that you have a win con even in those games, because you will not touch your G zone at all. You will not have G guards face up. You will not go into strides. It's literally just the early game, mid game, and grind it out into who wins at that point. Shout out to Tommy. That was a really good game too. Like, very smart. He knew what he was doing. He used Enchilada. He got rid of some of the cards. Now into the grade 4s, we were playing 1 Magnolia and 1 Lambros. And as you can see, we have the 2. Magnolia is there if you don't have any CB, or if you use the CB for one of our grade 2s that we use. You can still get 4 attacks, and it has quad check at that point because inherently it has triple drive, and then Thavas will give it the additional 1. So it's very cool. When it's placed, you can pop out the Thavas that way, so that way you can ride down back to grade 2. And then Lambros is more if you do have the extra counterblast to work with. It's more aggressive, of course. You'll get 5 attacks easily. You could extend potentially there depending if you have a restander or a swapper, and this came up a lot against the matchup I had with Tommy. I had to be aggressive in that matchup, and so I kept recycling Lambroses with Nickies like turn after turn. So I literally had this 1 copy of Lambros go back into the deck, soul charge, and then be able to suitor stride and just be in the promised land every single turn. So these are your main 2 cards. You just want to have options, and whatever you go into is best fit for that situation. Lastly, just to wrap up with the grade 3s, we have the grade 3 heals. These are so important because, one, you want to survive. It's another grade 3 that you could pitch for stride. Worst case scenario, you can ride this up and then go into stride if that's the worst case scenario. Other than that, you really want the rideable grade 3 XL gift one. Also keep in mind, during those ride down matchups, really utilize this card even in regular matchups, because to be quite frank, Aquaforce doesn't really have great G guards. So if you can capitalize on a grade 3 heal guardian early on a well-timed one, that will really do wonders for you in the long term. On to the grade 2s. We're playing 4 copies of Pursuit of Soul. I'll cover the basics with him. You Soul Bless 1, Rest 2, draw a card, and then this card gets 5k for every additional rearguard circle that you have. So this is continuous even during your opponent's turn. This was a card that was nagging a lot of people's attention because over time you will scale XL circles, and they can't just simply poke it with a 9k or a 10k. They actually have to commit some power behind it or some retired skill. I know even during the ride down matchup, this card, it was a constant target to get rid of. And I know my opponent was doing their best to get rid of it, outside of like trying to get rid of Nikki that can recycle the grade 4s, for example. So keep that in mind. And also, it's a card that depends on other rearguards too. And it's the same thing with Coral Assault, where if you see 4 of the units, it gets plus 15. It's our beater. And then at the end of the turn, if you've seen 4 or more battles, this goes into Soul and draws you a card. That's so key because of advantage. There's a ruling where you can actually play this first at the end of the turn before you retire your grade 4 from a pseudo stride. So that way, if you empty your Soul completely and you literally had nothing, this can go into Soul first, then you retire your grade 4, and guess what? You can choose Coral Assault as your new Vanguard. And guess what? It's also a grade 2. So that way you can still go back to grade 2 with the same Coral Assault that you use for rearguard during that same turn. So it's super valuable. That's why I still play 4. And as you notice that I mentioned that it's still, they're accountable on other rearguards. And that's where this other grade 2 is Prod Pollen Rephilius. In my world's deck profile, this was the spice. And I tried a couple things because we also have the addition of 1 copy Repress Strike Dragon. So with this in mind, there was a couple things that I tried in this grade 2 slot. So there's also the Algos that is phenomenal. If you ride it as Vanguard and go to grade 3, you get a top search for any Aquaforce card. You ride back down and you do it again to ride back up, but guess what? You do the Algos again. So you get another top 7 search, get something that you need. Phenomenal card too. And that would include Nicholas for sure in the grade 1 slot. And then we have Repress Strike Dragon, where some people were maxing this bad boy at 4 for sure. And even at least 3 or 2 maybe here and there. There was maybe 1 deck list that I saw that only played 1 copy of this card. And to me, in this current state, before History Collection, before any of the erratas too, I think 1 Repress Strike Dragon was good, particularly with my build too, because I also have revival cards that can get this card back later. And the more I play tested with this card and some of the other cards, Prod Pollen itself was more useful. It was more practical. Thavas has problems that you still have to mitigate, such as having enough rearguards to rest to be able to do the pseudo stride. When you do Gen Bold, it's an opportunity for Prod Pollen to generate you a board and not have to commit as much to hand as well, or from hand, I should say. And during the Narukami matchup, Prop Holland helps in that regard too. It destroys their binding aspect, and it forces them to do exterminate, or their bind zone isn't as high because tokens just disappear. They don't get binded. It allows you to have boosters with the plant tokens, so that way you're hitting 14k columns if you need them as boosters. And now you can hit it over 10k grade 2s, such as, Gear Chronicle, for example, or Bermuda Triangle when they have a 10k. So that's super helpful. Or you can make another 10k column with 2 tokens, and you have aggression and any matchup that you need. It's also there for the Narukami matchup, where we really didn't have an early game unless we were ready to lose regards, and we really didn't want to lose them and add to their bind zone count because it would hurt us in the long term, especially well-timed stunverse. That hurts like heck, right? And so now with that being in mind, like, how can I fit Repress Strike Dragon or Algos, right? And so that's why I went into Repress, and it's just 1 copy. And I felt this guy really shines in the Alexandros turn. It shines where you can give it power somehow, whether it be by skills or triggers, because it restands and gives itself power, another 10k. This itself is 19k, but with a trigger or a power up of 10k is 29, and then 39 and 49 and so on. It scales really strong because of its power gain that it gives to itself. And having a booster, it's the requirement to be able to restand. So you want to dedicate to that column and really utilize the Excel circles with your Pursuit Assaults or your Coral Assaults or your Narissas that are beefed up to 23-33. So your battle formations are very important. And I felt like having at least just 1 Repress Dragon added to that aggression. It wasn't like I needed 2 in 1 turn. That would be a 3 counterblast turn typically if you're including your Vanguard as well. So I was just like, I just need 1. And I need to dedicate that 1 column, and it could be Alexandros or it could be a different stride. It doesn't matter. But what I liked about this card is that Alexandros became more useful because I took out restanders for my prior deck list for Worlds, and I can tell that I hardly used Alexandros and then penned it a lot more with Valeos or even Faragas, for example, too. So this card shines in Alexandros, and sometimes you just need to beat him down with an Alexandros turn, and you just win right away at that point too. So I hope that explained a lot too, because I know some people were asking why didn't you just play this and get rid of the token generator? The token generator is there to help you with consistency for sure, and with the other functionalities that I just mentioned too. Without that, in my eyes, I think the deck can brick, and that'll cause you to lose games that you probably should have won. And that's the thing that I wanted to avoid. At least that if I was gonna lose, it would be by being outplayed. Onto the grade 1s, we were playing 4 copies of Nikki. This card is super important. As I mentioned, it recycles your grade 4s like Lambros, like it did in my matchup. And one of my matchups, super vital. You can write this as Vanguard, check the top 7 for a Thavas. We are not playing Dennis, so Thavas is your target, but honestly, you just need to make sure you write on Thavas and be good to go. Later on, you can also increase your soul count if you really need to, or recycle some grade 2s, such as Pursuit Assault, Coral Assault, or Narissa. Very helpful card, and it's just, I would recommend playing 4 just for the consistency. It's a 10k shield, and again, if you're in those write down matchups, Nikki just comes up more and it's more valuable in that sense. The next grade 1 is still 4 copies of Narissa. Narissa is such a powerhouse card, and it's one because at the end of the turn, if there's 4 or more rested riggers, this goes into Soul, draw a card. The powerhouse is that when it's rest by an ability, you can Soul Blast once to restand it by and give it 10k as well. This is not once per turn. Every time that I did a second or third time on this card, everybody would just pick up the card and read it as that's right, it's not once per turn. It's a 33k easy beater. It takes a little bit for your Pursuit Assaults to scale up. Your Coral Assaults are typically 24s or 29s if they're in the Excel circle. But the thing is that all dependent on some type of, whether it be circles or rested rearguards. Narissa is I just do my thing, and by the battle phase time, I could be the first attack or the second attack and start hitting hard, essentially. This can also be a really big booster for the Lambros column that you make for V Lambros, especially if you have a Coral Assault in front of it. It's a really big column that you can take abusive and just hit hard every single time. And we are playing also 2 copies of Barragios. Barragios is there for consistency, so just like Nikki. If Nikki fails us to find a Thavas, this is another way to try to check the top 5 for another Thavas. if you're going second, or maybe you go into an aggressive matchup, you can grab a grade 3 heal guardian and use that defensively that way too. Usually in the early game, of course, so that way that you can survive. Very vital. This can also help you discard cards for Nikki to be able to recycle. A good example too is that if you draw into your grade 4s, especially after you mulligan, for example, and you fight a grade 3, you can grab that grade 3 and discard the grade 4, which could be Magnolia, or it could be your Lambros V, and then Nikki now has a target to recycle back and soul charge, and now you can for sure know that it's at the bottom of the deck, and you can aggressively draw cards or soul charge with other cards, such as like Pursuit Assault, where it draws, and then if you have a second Nikki, if you have to get to the 3 rested, it can come up. So that's why even Barragios helps with discarding those unnecessary cards. One of the things that I don't like about Magnolia is that it's a grade 4 no matter what. So even if you're on Thavas, like as a grade 3, you cannot call it to rear guard. So then that means that you can't call over it to force it into the drop zone. Lambros has a skill where it counts as a grade 3 if you have a Thavas Vanguard. So you can call Lambros to a rear guard, call something over it, and now you have Lambros in the drop, and that's where Nikki can recycle it, and you can use that same Lambros to pseudo stride in the same turn. So it's those little things that really matter in the long term. And we're playing 2 more copies of Rollock. So Rollock was one of the cards that I actually reduced to 2 to make room for Repress Strike Dragon. So as we were playing this meta, it's with teams can be unpredictable. So it's not always like you're gonna face a meta deck, even if you're like XO in your account. There's always, depending on the seeding, you may face something random. Rollock is useful in those random matchups too, where you have high criticals or something like that. But like if you're going against a deck that naturally just goes up to the grade 3, gives stride up to you or something, then Rollock is Rollock at that point. So I felt comfortable reducing Rollock to 2 at this point. That was my point. And so I can focus more on adding aggression with Repress Strike Dragon. So something had to give in, so that way the Reprise can get in at that point. So I am still playing 2 copies of Frozen Resentment. So this is the revival card that I mentioned. So imagine this being an extra copy of all of your cards in your main deck. So think about this being 6 Pursuit Assaults, 6 Coral Assaults, 6 Narissas, 3 Reprise Strike Dragons, 5 Prod Pollen Revives, you name it, right? As soon as you have the desired card in the drop zone or in your soul, you have access to it. Not only that, but Frozen Resentment checks the top 3 and mills something, and then you can select that same target if you want to revive. So it has an extension of digging into your deck a little bit deeper. I've had it where I didn't have a Pursuit Assault, but I did have a Coral Assault to follow up in that grade 3 turn. And by using this card, it either, 1, checked the top 3 and I found the Pursuit Assault and called it. 2, I Soul Blasted the Pursuit Assault that I wrote on my grade 2 turn and called it immediately. And then at the end of the turn, when I did the pseudo stride and went back down to 2, Coral Assault was still there to be able to go into the soul and be the grade 2 that you write down to. So there are ways to still make your turns consistent. And that's why this card is super important. And I still like it a lot more than Spiritual Body Condensation right now, because Spiritual Body Condensation just gives power, which is nice. It's appreciated, don't get me wrong. But right now, the consistency is something that I appreciate heavily. Lastly, just the remaining triggers and zeros. Metros is the starter, doesn't really matter. We are playing 4 PG draws, and as you can see, it's the 4 PG draws, Pascal. There was so much room that was really tight in that aspect. So I didn't want to put Elementaria Sanctitude, and I just relied on Pascal, and honestly, I didn't miss the Elementaria at all. If we're in a more heavy guard restriction metagame, I may consider that in the future, but it just never really comes up. So that's why the 4 draw PGs are helpful. And then we're playing 4 of the grade, 4 of the Stride Fighter crits. You want that because you want to re-ride your grade 3s to get more Excel circles. You play more crits, and of course the Blessed Favor, which is another crit. This is before the other collection, before we get the more Cray Elemental OTs. I may experiment with those too as well. But this is another crit, this is another draw, another heal, another front, you name it. It's just well balanced. I haven't really complained it with Alco Force. Typically when you pop off with this, you're in a very good spot in most situations too. If you get a defensively, even great. Onto the strides, I'll be kind of brief with these. Nothing really changed except for one thing, 2 Gemboats. Gemboat's going to be your first stride 9 times out of 10. You'll flip either Gaphilia or you'll flip your Cyclones, just depending on how much counterblast you have available. If I don't have any face-up damage, I typically flip face-up the Gaphilia just in case they damage the Jaime. But if I have an extra counterblast or two, then I just flip Cyclone at that point. But you'll get your advantage, you'll retire, you restand. One of the things that I recommend for this turn too is because some people will give up the first stride because they would rather deal with a gem bolt instead of a Thavas pseudo ride down shenanigans. Because the gem bolt's a lot easier to take. And so you want to do your best to call cards like Coral Assault either from hand or if they're already on the field that can still attack before the restand. So that way your pokes are actually big pokes, hitting at least that 23k mark, if not more. And then you can just restand them and have that. So you can have a good amount of attacks, retire pressure, and then draw a bunch of cards and still be in a good spot where your opponent is kind of struggling just to stay in the game at that point. Like I mentioned with Cyclones, I run 2 copies. Over time, you'll flip these to power up your tokens. So the tokens not only are super helpful just in field essence, but they become really big boosters. So if you flip 1, they're 10k boosters. If you flip 2, there's 15k boosters. These come up on an Alexandros turn because, again, if you flip this on a gem bolt, you have 1 flip face up. Then if you go into Alexandros, you'll flip the second one. So now your tokens are 15k boosters. So your columns that you have, such as the Repress Strike Dragon, is a really big column. And that's outside of, you know, Coral Assault or Pursuit Assault or Narissa being big beaters of their own. This just helps like making those other columns a lot more harder to hit because triggers can be a thing too, especially if you're not on Valeos. If you're doing, I guess let me get into that. If you're going into Valeos, it's also another opportunity to flip another Cyclone. So that way you can also call tokens onto the Excel circles. And depending on how many you have face up, so if you have 1 face up, that token will be 15k on the Excel circle. So that could hit 11k Vanguards. So that means you can call less cards as well from your hand so you don't have to draw as much and potentially deck out, right? We've had that situation where Aquaforce can draw or go through its deck a lot and you'll be decking out. So just be mindful of that. But this is our saving grace against Katrina in general. So shout out to Brandon. He was one of the Katrina players that I faced. He played the Ines build and literally this was my solution. So we're back and forth and everything like that. Unfortunately, there was an over trigger in the mix and I did not have a second PG to stop the 100 million units. But other than that, it played out really, really well. And I even asked him to, like, would this have been like maybe game after this if I would have survived? And he's like, more than likely yes. It'd be really hard to stop everything else that you got going on. So really, you know, as a recommendation, this is a card that's still valuable in this metagame just for those same reasons as well. And it gets over the over trigger. Don't forget about that too, because sometimes like an over trigger can end your turn. So that's your like one solution. And if it makes sense to go into it, then go into it. Going into the Alexandros, like I mentioned, this is really for the tokens. You want to restand Repress Strike Dragon with this. You want to get it to the point where you can give it like plus 15, 20, 25 to 30k sweet spots. Obviously, the bigger the better, but it can become lethal because it already gives itself plus 10k. So if it's already 19 plus 15 makes it a 34 by itself. And then that doesn't include triggers. So if you get triggers, more spice, right? So super impactful. And that also generically flips a Cyclone. Lambros also can come up if they damage deny you and you have a Repress Strike Dragon. You can actually use Gaphilia to give you a counter charge at that point. And if you can still do a Lambros type of play, then you can give the Repress Strike Dragon plus 10k. So again, that will become 29 on its own, not including the booster. So that is a potential play now that could come up, but it did not come up for me because I did have the counterblast to do Alexandros or some other stride. The other one-off that we do play is Ferragrus. This can come up to generate another Excel circle, generate more attacks. This ideally comes out when you have plenty of big beaters like Corals, Pursuits, Narissas, random cards that you can pull in the back and then move it and give it 10k to make another beater. You could also combine it with Repress Strike Dragon. That works too. But I feel like it's really weird because it moves the unit to an Excel circle that opened up. So that means that there's no booster. So the unit that gets the plus 10k from Ferragrus can never be a Repress Strike Dragon because you don't have a booster in the Excel circle. So it kind of contradicts it. You can get around it if you play Wheel Assault and cards like that, but you might as well just commit to the Alexandros play. And you have the Progenitor. So this is the one card that did change. I had Megiddo. I honestly never really used Megiddo as often as I would to. And if I did, it was already in a losing situation. And I felt like maybe I just needed a different option, and I revisited Bellinera. But one of the other things that I looked into this card is that the effect when an opponent's Guardian is placed, you can do that at any point, including your rear guard attack. So if you're close to deck out and this is really your only saving grace, then you can not attack Vanguard, but if you have a full field of Excel circles, all your riggers can attack and you can kill Guardians. So if they're at 5 damage, it's like the ideal situation, so you can hit something, get through their hand if they have a decent hand size, and go for game at that point too. Lastly, with the G-Guards, nothing's really changed. We really need new G-Guards. Ice Barrier, first or fourth battle plus 10k free. First or fourth battle, so the first battle you Counter Blast 1, give plus 5k to your Vanguard permanently. Did not come up. The fourth or more battle is plus 20k. That is one of your biggest shields. On top of Ionis, if you have a field, Ionis can get as big as plus 25k. It also gives resist and cannot be hit skills to your rear guards too. So if you're trying to protect your pursuit assaults, this is a very good G guard to go into, so you guard it successfully. And what I notice sometimes opponents, they'll try to hit hard with the Vanguard, but if they know that they're not going to get through, they're going to start attacking key rear guards. So that helps protect them thanks to Ionis. And of course the two Gaphilia. Countercharge once it's face up with the G zone, so blast 1, or you can unlock or undelete. Things of that nature, but it's really there for the counter charge, and it can be flipped with Gembolt or any other strides in case you're already flipping through Cyclones, or if not. I'm going to show up an example play for the Alexandros turn, so that way you guys can get a better idea of how the synergy works with some of these cards. This is assuming this is your second stride turn. You flipped Cyclones up. You're going to flip the second one with this once it goes off. And you have 2 Excel circles, and you have your column over here. And let's say you beefed up your Narissa and your Pursuit Assaults also get power from the Excel circle. So you can have an example formation. This is why I was talking about, like, Prod Pollen can build a field where you have boosters. And if you didn't have like a Narissa, this could be this way too, if you want to. But I'm just going to have like some kind of ideal situation in this case. So for the first battle, you can poke with Repress, and you can poke like a 9k or something like that. Then the next big one would be Pursuit in this case. This is plus 5 from the Excel circle, 10 and 10k from its skill, so it's 24. Then for the third wave, you can boost, use this drive tracks, give any triggers to this guy. Then at the end of the battle, you counterblast 1 and flip another Cyclone, and then you restand these 2, and they get plus 15k, if not more, like 20k or 30k. And now you have a restood field. So these are the biggest ones right now. This column can now attack because it's a beefed up. This is actually 17 plus 10k is 27. Now you have 4 more rested units. You can attack with Coral Soul, which is 29. And then if it also depends if you're like high critical, if you drove a crit trigger, if it makes sense. This, as long as it's the 4th battle or more, that's what really matters. You can attack, boost it, immediately stand, counterblast 1, give it an additional plus 10k. And depending on who's bigger or who's smaller, then Pursuit Assault can attack next, which is 24 plus whatever power it got from Alexandros. And then this can attack again. So we did a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 attacks in this turn. And as you can see, pretty much from the second attack and moving forward, it was 24k, if not higher. The first attack was really the 9k poke. Then you have your Vanguard. This is 29. This was 27k. And obviously with the boosters, these are 15k boosters. Well, except for the Vanguard attack, that's a 10k booster at the time, but it's still significant at that point too. So very simple play, but I thought I'd figure out to show that as well. The other play that you can do is also in the early game. If you so happen to read this is Vanguard, this could come up. You can call Prod Pollen and give it a booster in the sense. And if you want to commit more cards, you can, but this is a very simple play. What you could do is if you want to poke safe, you can poke for 14 here. Your Vanguard would also be 14. And then use the skill to restand it, and now your Vanguard stands. So remember, this works on Vanguards too as well. So it can be a little bit nutty. But then after that, you can attack again and get another drive check. So this kind of helps with filtering. What's really cool too is that it helps discard a card from hand. So if you, again, had a mulligan where you get a Lambros or a Magnolia and you want to put in the drop zone immediately, or if you don't have the proper grade 3, so you can G-Assist, that's an opportunity to discard it if you need to. Otherwise, you can use a create the heal guardian to guard on their turn. So it just really depends on what you need. At that point, if you went second, you can discard the ticket shield if you don't want to discard combo pieces too as well. And this lets you have 3 attacks. The attacks may not all go through, but at least you go through another drive check, so it kind of goes a little bit deeper into your deck by discarding a card and of course using counterblast. So just be mindful of that as well. And that's pretty much for the card choices and also some key plays. I wanted to show off the grade 2 a little bit in action so you get a better idea, but I think you get the gist of it. Again, some closing thoughts, some suggestions too. Going into the event and coming out of it, we went into top 8, which is great, but we unfortunately got kicked out of top 8 by losing immediately. But you know, the matchups were Gear Chronicle, like I mentioned. I faced 2 Katrinas as well, and I faced some other random decks such as Dark Irregulars, and then of course Luard. And then top 8 was one of the DI players again too. So shout out to his gameplay as well. Did a really phenomenal job as well. We actually were still playing until both our teammates finished their games, and at that point my teammates have lost. So we just decided to not finish that play. So who knows? But anyway, other than that, it was a great event too. I got a chance to see a lot of people, play a lot of good games. Looking at the card choices too, you know, for some thoughts. Really, I didn't miss anything. I felt like it was the right call with the ratios that I had. Every card had their own purpose and also multi-purpose, which really did come up. It really helped the deck consistently do its thing. I only lost once, actually, so I went X1 personally as well. And shout out to you, Brandon, who got that one. So I don't know what to say. Really, it's a solid deck, and if you want to experiment with the algos with Nicholas, you're more than welcome to. You could experiment more with Repress Strike Dragon and get rid of the Prod Pollens too. I just feel like most players just don't like the Prod Pollen as much. I don't know why, but it's a really good card. Try it out. I don't know. But other than that, it was great. I think for future stuff too, with like History Collection coming about soon enough in the next couple of months, this deck will change potentially. It really depends on the impact of the strides when they're fully revealed. People are assuming that they just generate 2 gifts across the board, but that's not 100% sure. They showed all the reprints of which stride breaks or break strides are being shown, and a lot of it's what you expect, most of it. So there's nothing really game changing yet that is obvious, but I'm sure people are cooking in the lab trying to figure out how they can break it, which can transform this deck. For me personally, I've been playing Aquaforce for a very long time, and then competitively recently I've been playing it for, gosh, probably a year, if not more. At this point, it's always been in my back pocket. It's a well invested deck too, so I'm happy for that in the premium format and also for V Premium. But I wouldn't mind trying something else, and I did almost bring Musketeers for premium. I was this close. I was excited to bring something new and try something new, but my teammates agreed, and myself as well, that this was the better pick and it served us well. So I'm really happy for that. And I will be doing also a Regalia deck profile for premium, because I did some interesting card ratios and a different mindset behind that one as well, adding a different win con. So I'm excited to show that off too, because I put some effort into it, and I'm sure you can get some value from that too as well. If you want to support the channel, use the affiliated links through 50 Card Shop, TCG Player, Trading Card Med. If you want to improve your skill level, feel free to book a METAFY session, or even get my book if you're hungry to improve at a higher level. Or if you're starting new and you just want to grow as fast as possible, either way is a good option. I just like to help the community in any way I can. And so, on to the next one, amigos. Bye!